So although people are still joining, we are going to get started in the interest of time. So welcome all of you. Just a reminder as you come on to please introduce yourselves, your name, country, and organization in the chat. It's most helpful to the presenter to know who you are. So welcome to UCT's Pesticide Discussion Forum. I am Professor Andrea Rother. I'm head of the Environmental Health Division at the University of Cape Town in South Africa. And this is the Pesticide Discussion Forum, which is funded by the Swedish government through the Swedish Chemical Agency. And really the purpose of this discussion forum is for us to have the opportunity to delve into specific issues related around pesticide risk and pesticide risk management that with a broad range of stakeholders that we may not normally have the opportunity to do so. This is a non-partisan group. We may not agree with each other's opinions, but we respect what is said. It's also not a webinar, but more of a discussion forum. So you will note that everyone will be muted and keep their cameras off, except for the presenter and myself. We encourage you to find the chat room if you haven't already and introduced yourself. And that is where the discussion will be taking place today. We will also be having some polls, so make sure you find Mentimeter, and there will be a link put in the chat so that you can respond to some of the questions. So it then leaves me to move to today's discussion, which is going to be on impurities. And we're very honored to have Dr. Marcus Müller with us today to take us through this discussion, a discussion that I hear often mentioned in various platforms. And I hope you will use this opportunity to ask various questions. So Dr. Marcus Müller is an organic chemist who has worked with the Swiss Office for Agriculture in the field of pesticide registration, environmental safety, residues, and product chemistry for more than 30 years. He also served as a CPAC chairman and as an expert and chair in the United Nations JMPS panel by the FAO. He's author and co-author of more than 120 peer-reviewed research articles dealing mainly with environmental behavior of pesticides and associated analytical methodologies. He has been a lecturer teaching pesticide science at the Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich for more than 25 years. So we're very fortunate today to have an expert with us to take us through impurities. Marcus, you're most welcome, and I hand the mic over to you.
So many thanks, Andrea, for the kind introduction. So I'm very pleased and honored myself to have the opportunity to present this topic in the framework of the Pesticide Forum. And when we start with the first slide, thank you, Tatum. Impurities are actually a part of FAO pesticide specifications. So these specifications are an important element of pesticide management throughout their life cycle. And the pesticide specifications are also a part and mentioned in the International Code of Conduct on Pesticide Management. This is Rome 2014, and the data requirements and rules and criteria set out in the brand new version, second edition manual on the development and use of FAO and WHO specifications for chemical pesticides, March 22. We shall also soon have a similar manual on microbial pesticides, just by the way, when we talk on risk reduction. Can I have the next one, please, Tatum? So these are these two documents. One is the International Code of Conduct, Pesticide Management, this was signed or by the assemblies of FAO and WHO. So all the FAO and the WHO countries that belong to these organizations have signed that. And the other is the brand new manual on development and use of these specifications for chemical pesticides, second edition. And as I said, will follow soon a new manual on microbial pesticides. Next one, please. So what are these specifications? So these specifications are a rather technical piece of text, and they give a list of basic criteria what a pesticide, a technical or formulated product should comply with. So of course, a specification is very specific for each active ingredient and formulation concerned. And JAMPS evaluates and FAO publishes these specifications for agricultural pesticides. WHO does the same for the public health ones. And currently, there are more than 150 pesticide specifications for technicals, and many more for their formulated products are available. So they are, there is a free download on the FAO website. Can I have next one, please? So this is just a screenshot of the pest and pesticide management website at FAO. So you see all the topics they are dealing with: integrated pest management, pesticide risk reduction guideline standards. And there you find a list of FAO specified specifications for pesticides in agriculture. And the link where you find that page is on top and will also be then posted. Okay. And I have next one. So what actually does a specification provide us? So a specification, as I said, has these criteria, what actually should a pesticide should do and look like. First thing is the correct appearance, like you have a granules or you have a liquid or you have a powder. Then it should be the correct compound. That sounds very, very trivial, but it's often not. So when you know how many related compounds there are on the market, I just named two. You know probably mancozeb as a fungicide, but there is also manib, also fungicide, but without the zinc. So it's correct compound. Then it should contain the correct amount. And for a technical active, it's a minimum content in the technical ones and a declared concentration in formulations. The maximum limits of relevant impurities, and we come to that much more in detail in a few minutes. And then also acceptable physical chemical properties, like that when you have a formulation, it should be stable in storage. Okay. And I have the next one, please. So I would first have a closer look at technical grade active ingredients, because the concept of impurities is easier to explain and understand with the technical actives. So these the technical grade actives are relatively pure active ingredients. They are produced in a technical process, which should be well controlled, hopefully. And the typical purity of a technical active is, let's say, 900 to 1000 gram, depending on the actual compound. And these technical actives are used to produce formulations. And just by the way, we have diluted technicals too, so they are called technical concentrates. Okay, this takes us to the next slide. We have impurities, and when we look at impurities, I think there is something missing, but anyway, we carry on. So I just try to explain. Can you go back one, Tatum? Yes. So impurity, yes, because you skipped that one. When we look at impurities, and we keep in mind that the technical active is around 900, let's say we have 920 grams per kilogram, and then we all know there is a rest to 1000 grams per kilogram. This is 80 grams per kilogram. What is that? And that are impurities. The question is, when we have a different kind of impurities, are all these impurities in a technical equally important? And the answer is no. It depends on the consequences of their presence. So we can form different categories of impurities. So can I have the next one, please? Yes, categories of impurities. So we have one category is they are sitting there, they are detectable, and we use a threshold level of 1 gram per kilogram. But not all of them that are detectable are significant. Some of them make the active ingredient more toxic or hazardous. So, and we call these impurities that make the active ingredient and then also the formulation more hazardous, they are called relevant. And for these relevant impurities, we do not have a threshold value. So we have some examples where we have even levels of a few micrograms per kilogram for compounds that are cancerogenic, reprotoxic, or mutagenic. Next, please. I have brought you a simple case study on malathion. And malathion is a very old compound in use since 1956. It's organophosphorus insecticide used in agriculture, public health, e.g. malaria, vector control, and medical use, for instance, in shampoos. So this is the structure of malathion, which has a phosphorus atom, double bond to sulfur, and the side chain malonic acid with two ester groups. And malathion is not very toxic, so the WHO classification is slightly hazardous. So it's about LD50 is around 2000 grams per kilogram. Not so toxic for an organophosphorus compound. Next, please. there has been several cases where malathion has caused poisoning in Pakistan, in malaria workers. And for instance, in 1976, Pakistan undertook a malaria eradication program using malathion. And there was a massive malathion poisoning among the spray personnel despite the prior instruction and proper personal protective equipment. So out of 7,500, 2,800 became severely poisoned. And that's surprising because malathion is not so toxic. And the reason was that there was an impurity in malathion, an impurity, isomalathion, which caused that intoxication. Can I have next one, please? So these two structures, malathion on left-hand side again. And on the right-hand side, you see the structure of isomalathion. And it's not easy to find difference. You may realize that the sulfur at the phosphorus has changed position. So this small but significant difference makes a toxification of malathion. Next, please. So this is a study which was done afterwards by a guy at the CDC in Atlanta, who could show that the small amounts of isomalathion added to malathion, it caused a potentiation of the toxicity of malathion. That means isomalathion is a relevant impurity in malathion because it makes malathion much more toxic. Okay, next please. So we have a look at the how the FAO specification for malathion looks like. So technical is colorless to light amber liquid. The content is 950 grams per kilogram minimum. And then we have a whole range in total 5 impurities. And one of them is isomalathion, which is limited to 4 grams per kilogram maximum. That means that maximum is chosen carefully to a level that the toxicity of malathion is not drastically, not significantly increased and is technically achievable. That's why malathion is a relevant impurity in malathion. Okay, so can I have next one, please? So in conclusion, we can say relevant impurities make an active ingredient formulation more toxic or more hazardous. And we have so-called cutoff levels for that increase. It is 10% when the toxicity has a same characteristics, or it shouldn't be more sensitizing or shouldn't add cancerogenicity, mutagenicity, or reprotox. Like in the next slide, please. A second very short case study with a modern fungicide. So some of you may know prothioconazole. So this is a fungicide, has a sterol demethylation activity, left-hand side. And when you look for the triazole ring, you see that triazole ring has a sulfur attached with a double bond. That's why it's called protio for the sulfur, or abbreviated PTZ. And this PTZ has an impurity, which is called PTZ destio in the fungicide. The left-hand side where the sulfur is removed. Okay, next please. So prothioconazole is not toxic. So the global GHS classification number is 5. The LD50 ray is more than 6,200 milligram per kilogram. Class U means unlikely to cause hazard. The impurity PTZ destio has also low acute toxicity, but as studies in rats have shown, it causes malformation in the unborn. So it's called teratogenic. So it produces supernumerary ribs and malformations in fetuses. That means PTZ destio makes PTZ more toxic, especially for women in childbearing age, and is therefore relevant because it adds a new hazard, a new dimension of toxicity. Okay, can I have the next slide, please? So this is an abbreviated form of the FAO specification for PTZ technical. So it's white to beige powder. The minimum content is 970 grams per kilogram. And there is one relevant impurity. PTZ destio is limited to 0.5 grams per kilogram maximum, because as tox studies have shown that levels below 0.5 grams per kilogram do not cause malformations. So levels below are safe and do not cause additional hazard with prothioconazole. That's why, but it's relevant and should be limited. Okay. Next, please. These specifications are published, as I said. I showed you the FAO webpage. And these specifications come always with a manufacturer identified. So for malathion, the company that has proposed the first data package is a Danish company, Cheminova. For prothioconazole, it is Bayer. And additional manufacturers may apply to FAO and WHO, to JMPS, to have their products evaluated for compliance. And they need a limited data set. So this opens the door for generic manufacturers because the costs of entry are lower, as the main cost is with the tox studies. But they have to show that their product is not worse. That means it's not more hazardous and can comply with all clauses, minimum purity, maximum limits for relevant impurities. And all that in the specifications is then explained in detail in the evaluation reports that come together with the specification. Okay. can I have the next one, please? So in conclusion, FAO specifications are a global standard for agriculture pesticides. They can be used in national legislation for trade contracts and also in official quality control. And the process of setting specifications for pesticides and equivalents, as it is described in the manual for development and use of FAO specifications, this is a very useful model for national and regional legislation authorities and for quality control. Okay, that brings us to the end. I hope I'm more or less within time. Andrea? So,
thank you, Marcus. Thank you very much for that introduction and really quite clearly explaining impurities, which I think is very complicated and challenging for regulators. So we're going to move into the chat for the first question, which is for participants to indicate to what extent, according to your knowledge, FAO specifications are point of reference for pesticide management in your country, and always to include your country in the response. There is a question that has been posted already in the chat, Marcus. So Ahmed from Iran has asked a question about isomalathion. I'm not sure if you can see it or if you'd like me to read it to you.
Can you read it to me? So
he says, is isomalathion an activated form that works to kill the insect like some other OPs? And
not really. So malaoxone is, but isomalathion is an internal transesterification and degradation product. Malaoxone works to kill insects. Isomalathion works much better to kill humans, unfortunately.
Thank you for that. And he thanks you for that as well. You can keep your mic on and your video and respond to questions as they appear in the chat. And I also invite members to ask questions if you still have questions from the presentation. If you weren't clear about things, to please post them in the chat. And we will have a poll shortly as well. So Marcus, I'm assuming you can see the chat. There was a post from Zimbabwe.
Yes, I'm just scrolling down the chat and try to identify.
Yeah, it would be good to hear from participants how the FAO specifications are being used in registration. So while you're responding to question 1, I can see there's already some responses coming in the chat. You can also go to mentimeter.com. The link is posted in the chat. If you would like to answer the question, does the phytosanitary law in your country or region explicitly refer to the FAO specifications, which is the JMPS specifications? There's been a request for Tatum to post the FAO specifications link, which I think was done previously. So Tatum, you can post that again.
Yeah. So I'm just looking for any question that I could answer immediately now. So I have here the question from Girma that the remaining percentage mean impurity. Yes, it means impurities. Whatever, it can be many different kinds of impurities. I can maybe briefly explain that the companies, they are submitting a kind of, so they analyze 5 batches out of production and they have to do a mass balance. So in that way they can show what is actually, how much they have of the active ingredient they have and how much are impurities. So I see now the post coming in. South Africa, not sure. I don't recall ever having seen. Yes, and Ethiopia, I'm not aware of some other, without naming company, sorry, without naming the country. Yes, we rely on FAO regulations adopted to local regulations. Zimbabwe does not refer. Tanzania, yes, great. And Iran, I can say it follows. I just have to move around the other windows. Not completely facing the dangerous situation of pesticide poisoning that I can imagine. Yes, Malawi, not sure. So the reason for that question is, as I understand the situation, and I have had the opportunity to visit quite a number of African countries, and I know a bit the situation with phytosanitary laws, that if when it's not in the law, you cannot request from stakeholders and companies and importers and extension services that they keep these specifications and the process in mind. So that's why it would be important in the implementation process to have an explicit reference. Tanzania, yes. Great. So my overall impression up to now is that we have not so many clear yes, many not so sure. Malawi. In Caribbean countries, no explicit reference.
Marcus, there are still some postings in the chat for you as well.
Yes, so I try to, you know, men are not so good in multitasking, as we all know.
It's a bit of a challenge with the computer in any case, all these different screens popping up. No problem.
Yes.
I'll see if I can read through some of them as well.
So I try to follow up.
So there's some comments about its use, mostly used in laboratory settings, that is then used for registration.
Yeah.
There's a question of how often is it required for ingredient testing of a particular pesticide? Only one time is enough at reference labs or not?
Well, yes, that laboratory question is always a very difficult one. So basically, there are guidelines how the, let's say, the market control should be done, and there are different strategies, as I know from in the countries. Some countries, they test everything what comes in before it can even go to the storehouse, like in Morocco. So Morocco has a central laboratory in Gaza. Others have also laboratories that do the testing, like the SAPs in Pretoria. They do a lot of testing in South Africa. The South African Bureau of Standards, by the way. Zambia mostly required, yes. That's a very good point, Lloyd. So that's one thing that companies have to show in the registration process, that their product complies with the specification, but what then comes in may be from a different batch. So that these are two different strategies. I try to follow up on the chat and to identify. I know that Kenya also has at least one laboratory that does quality control. So it's the KEFIS, at least it was the KEFIS a couple of years ago. The Kenya Plant Health Institute. So my overall impression when I look at these posts is that some are yes, but some are not sure, and some say it's not really, it's no for the reference of the, let's say, country phytosanitary law to FAO specifications. Like in the Caribbean countries. I have a stupid question. Eswatini. What is Eswatini?
Eswatini is the name now of what used to be Swaziland.
I see. Sorry for that, for my stupidity. So thank you so much for helping out Republic of South Africa. I'm not sure. So yes, but that means that would be something, of course, that would in a way help a lot. Sudan is not sure, Tanzania, yes. Nigeria, yes. I see that in the post. And then we have 5 minutes left to discuss question 1. So I try to recap what I see from the many countries that respond here. My impression is that the majority is actually no. There is no reference to FAO specifications. There are some which say yes. and some are saying not sure. And some say no. So in overall, I feel that will be some FAO will have to do some advocacy for better make better understand, better explain the benefit of having FAO specifications as a global standard, also better understood in in this country, because the majority seems to say no, or maybe no.
I think it's also important, Marcus, I think it's also important to make, maybe, I mean, you've made the point, but to make it quite clear again why it's so important to use these specifications in registering pesticides in particularly low and middle income countries. And maybe that will come out a bit more in the discussion. Yes. But I think, you know, the point that you're making, that there's somewhat of a low level of not being sure, or lack of clarity, or maybe the specifications aren't being used, but really what the importance is of it. And I don't know if you want to touch on that now, or if you want to move.
Yeah, I can.
Question.
So if you Tatum will allow me, so basically the FAO specifications are a kind of benchmark for pesticides that are off patent, and still some of them are on patent. A benchmark, what is actually the quality that can be achieved, a reasonable quality that is evaluated in terms of minimum purity, relevant impurities, and also acceptable physical chemical properties of the formulations. So this benchmark, this comes free of charge, because it's all there, it's all available, it's at your hand. So that will prevent possible manufacturers from wherever it is might be to submit substandard pesticides with substandard active ingredients and substandard formulations in your country. So this is as many of these pesticides are off patent, there are many of the companies that have applied for equivalence are also from lower income countries like India and China. So they come at a reasonable price, but yet they are tested. And this gives you the understanding, and gives you, let's say, the peace of mind that you buy the best stuff you can get for your money at a reasonable price. So that's the huge advantage. But for the registration, to have these FAO specifications and the manual in your phytosanitary law, this would give the registration authority the authority to really say, this is the quality we want. So that's the huge advantage.
Thank you for that. And I think it's really important for members to understand that we're going to move into question 2, but just Tom has posted a point saying, you know, is it voluntary for countries to follow the FAO specification, or is it included in international agreements? So my understanding is it's voluntary, it has to be in national legislation.
Yes.
We don't really have an international pesticide convention. We only have a code of conduct, which is voluntary.
Yes, absolutely. So we have this signatory member states that have signed the code of conduct in the general, so it was accepted in the General Assembly. And with that, the FAO member states, they said, yes, we will do the best we can to implement the code in our country. And that includes the Article 6, where the pesticide specifications are explicitly mentioned. So the question 2, and I've briefly mentioned the equivalence process. I fully understand that the FAO, that these FAO pesticide specifications, they cannot cover all the compounds and all the formulations you may need for special purposes in your country, in your agriculture. So you may have special crops, you may have special environmental conditions. So there must be a process that allows the national authority to assess whether or not a company provides an active ingredient and formulation that is not worse than a reference. So this is the equivalence process. That equivalence process is a bit a difficult one for several reasons, and I hope we can discuss that a bit later on. So the equivalence process is a very important element in that in the international registration, because it has many advantages and also is a bit difficult to implement, especially in the start. So the question is, do you have the equivalence process in your country? And of course, this would be also in the phytosanitary law or bylaw, whether equivalence process is in your country or in your region.
Thanks, Marcus. So we'll be looking at that question in the chat. I see there have been some things already posted, and also we will be having a poll question. So there's some comments posted from Zimbabwe.
Yes, so I see. Thank you, Nzira, so much. That you say that Zimbabwe uses the equivalence process, that's great. And of course, I would be much interested to also hear from the challenges you have, and there are. Then I see Nigeria, not sure, South Africa, not sure, Iran only in part and not completely. I can also understand that. Kenya, not sure. So while we are waiting for the feedback, I could just continue a bit talking for 1 minute or so. And the challenge is, of course, that the equivalence process is based on comparing a reference profile with that a company has submitted with what a generic company wants to sell. And this reference profile, I said before, these 5 batches, the 5 batches from a reference company, that's of course something that needs to be well protected, because that tells everything how the product is manufactured. So this is confidential business information and needs to be well protected. That's sometimes a bit difficult because that has to be in the phytosanitary law too. Okay, so I see there is a list. Zambia, not sure. Government appears to have a predicted control of pesticide to agree. Intel. Oh, that's an interesting post. That's, of course, that's a critical comment when crop life is in control. I'm not sure whether I understand it correctly. To crop life, or is that concept from crop life? Yes, in Kenya. Thank you. Rwanda, yes, great. South Africa, Guyana. It's, of course, it's very important that government or Ministry of Agriculture publishes the list of approved active ingredients. So formulators understand what kind of approved active ingredients are there. A list is available, published in Zimbabwe. Thank you so much. Guyana's legislative for approved pesticides. That's excellent. Thank you. Rwanda, yes. Guyana, yes. In Kenya. Sudan, yes. Thank you. So overall, my impression is that it's much more yes than in the first question. I understand that introducing equivalence in a registration system is first an uphill task. But then when it's settled and the companies understand, that it becomes easier. So my impression is much more positive, much more yes. That's excellent. Rwanda, yes, yes. Sudan, we have had that already. Yes, in Kenya. So I have to say I'm surprised that about the extent of positive feedback on the equivalence, how whatever in detail the process behind is. And my experience, and I have been in many countries, also in Asia and Latin America, is the critical point is always the sufficient data protection of confidential business information. And if the companies that have to submit the data have sufficient trust, then it works fairly well. Okay, parameters, minimum, maximum impurities. That's a very, very good start. Thank you. Tanzania. The authority publish. Can you scroll up? Proof pesticide manufacturer. Excellent. That's really good. Target pests, crops. That's really good. Yes. Okay, so we see in essence a lot of positive responses, even when we assume that there are some differences in the degree of details. What are published? So if I may just comment that behind that question is actually also something that has different names in different countries. For instance, in the United States, there is an expression, public right to know. That means the public has a right to know, for instance, what are the pesticides that are used, what are the manufacturers, what is the minimum purity, what is the active ingredient. So these can never be a business confidential. Thank you. Yes, Kenya. Great, great. So I have to thank you, Amesha, for that comment that Act number 36, I have to check that, how that looks like. That's, as you say, Andrea, that's a violation of access to information and transparency. So that's a right, public right to know. Myanmar, maximum limits of impurities are included. Interesting. So it's middle of the night in Myanmar now. Even more that you attend. That's great. Great to have you here. So in Europe, we have a convention of public access to information. So it's called Aarhus Convention. What never ever can be a business convention, confidential, or people have to pay for. Like you, Tom, say you have to, you had to renew your subscription. So in that Aarhus Convention, it says what people should have free access to that information. Can I ask you about the timing for the recap?
Yeah, you may give your concluding thoughts, Marcus. Thank you.
No problem. Love more. Good to have you here. Okay, thank you. We have 5 minutes left. So overall, my impression is that the vast majority of our members here from the countries, they say, yes, we have something published. there seems to we seem to have differences in the degree of information. So ideally, it would be good to have a separation of the active ingredient, the manufacturer, and the formulator. That would open the door for national formulators, domestic formulators, to buy active ingredient from an approved source. But the overwhelming majority says yes, they approve, they publish the manufacturer's name, like in Tanzania, target pest crops. So I'm very glad to see that apparently equivalence and then the information of the public seems to work well. That's very good. Of course, it would be interesting to look into a few of these phytosanitary laws and bylaws to see how they are set up. The problem is that, or the challenge is that the equivalence process is not really static, but it changes also a bit. Like, so the question is, how do national authorities follow that? Do they just make an image, or do they make a dynamic link to data requirements? But that's a second ranking question. So my impression is that the publication equivalence there is there. Many countries do it, and many countries also do publish with different degrees of details, like in Tanzania, where you have manufacturer's name, active ingredients, and so many details. Last time I was in Kenya, I bought the booklet. So with all the pesticides in there, so I guess in the meantime, it's also on the internet. So
Marcus, oh, sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
There's a question from Tom. He's asking if anyone is looking at biological pesticides, so biopesticides, and the impurities that they may contain.
So the question goes to all participants, or goes to me?
It's in the chat. It's for all participants.
Okay.
If you click on the chat, you'll see them.
So there is, as I mentioned in the introduction, there will soon be a FAO WHO manual on microbial pesticides. And there we have an extended chapter on active ingredients and impurities. So this will give a lot of guidance also to countries. How can they deal with impurities in biological pesticides? Of course, they are different. Like when you have a BT as an insecticide, they may contain impurities that are, let's say, pathogenic. So other germs that are pathogenic, like E. coli, and so this of course has then to be understood in the context of microbial pesticides. This also contains viruses and the impurities they may contain. Yes, so Bacillus cereus is one of them that is really you have to look for. Okay, so
Thanks. Yeah, we can move on to question 3. That'd be great.
that would be, so I think the impression was very clear from question 2 and the feedback. This will take us, let's move on to question 3. Of course, when you want to implement the code and the manual and the impurities, then all these aspects have to be covered in the phytosanitary law and bylaws. So, and these bylaws, they have to adequately cover these aspects of relevant impurities, provide sufficient guidance so that the manufacturers or importers understand the importance of the issue. As we have seen with the 2 previous compounds I have shown in the introduction, so isomalathion in malathion and desthiol in prothioconazole, what is the relevance? And of course, this needs to be in the phytosanitary law and bylaws to the manufacturers. They understand the importance. For instance, this is also an aspect of labeling and packaging. Like isomalathion is formed under the formation of isomalathion is formed by residues of water, or desthiol prothioconazole is formed under the influence of light. So never package prothioconazole in a glass, in a transparent glass bottle. Okay. Yes, so I'm just looking also at your comment, Jane. Thank you so much for that. It is a challenge, indeed. I fully agree with you, because the impurities and biopesticides, they are taken as safe, but they may also be very toxic. More research is needed, that's absolutely clear. And then I see again the comment of Yoon Zira, thank you so much, from Zimbabwe. Registration process provides general guidance to manufacturers, importers. That's excellent. It has to be not too specific, but specific enough. Then I see, thank you, Blessings, for your post on the situation in Malawi. The requirements are almost similar to FAO guidelines for labeling. Not covered, so impurities are not covered by bylaws. That's true that when you start to request such information from companies, then of course usually there is no jubilation, because this is additional work for them to make that understandable to the manufacturers. And we have had a situation a couple of years ago, 10 years ago, let's say in China, we had 5,000 manufacturers for pesticide active ingredients, 5,000, imagine that. And the quality was not always overwhelming. So that number has been cut down by Chinese government drastically. So we have fewer but larger companies that understand the requirements much better. So I see your comment, thank you, Tefera. not covered. Then Zambia not covered. Sudan, all with included guidelines. That's excellent. Thank you, Sumaya. That's very good. And of course, the other aspect is when you request something, you also have to need checks and balances in place. That means you need some kind of monitoring scheme for pesticides. So one aspect would be to check all the products that come into your country, or depending on your country, I assume quite a number of your countries will have formulation plants as well, if not plants to produce, to manufacture active ingredients. So I wonder how well there are monitoring schemes in place that also include impurities. Control is very difficult, yes. And the control is very difficult because it is much rather easier to analyze for active ingredient content than so analyzing for impurities is much more challenging. There is no monitoring scheme in Kenya in place, South Africa, not sure. Yes. Yes, that's a very good comment, Jane. I switch from the chat. So bylaws do not cover impurities, and lambda cyhalothrin seems to be more toxic than technical material. That also indicates that something happens in the technical material that is formulated there. And I could guess what happens, actually. Haphazard from researchers. That's a very nice way to say it. Yes, of course. So involvement, I see without naming a country, there is official monitoring, though it requires multi-stakeholder approach. That's the disadvantage when you do not have an official quality control laboratory. Yes, so my impression now from that last question, I was aware that this question that relates to Article 4 of the code is the most difficult one. So that's what was the reason that I chose to have it right at the end of these questions. I'm aware that this is a difficult thing in many countries. And even, let's say, an extension service that helps farmers with particular problems or so is or does the, let's say, helps in evaluating products, newer products. So my impression is that a monitoring scheme is in general not in place. There is a general monitoring process in Zimbabwe. Yes, that's good. So, yes, thank you. So, Sumaya, before the pesticide, the sample of the pesticide register in the laboratory. Yes, that many countries do that. That the importer manufacturer has to send in. So that means that the companies that want to have their products registered, they submit a data package on efficacy and on the composition. Not so I see. Thank you, Mohamed, for your comment. Sierra Leone is not. Let's scroll down to see. Okay, so my impression is that is more or less close to Ethiopia. No quality monitoring is left for manufacturing. One formulation company. Okay, so the vast majority country feedback is no, there is no monitoring whatever in place. So the article of the code also explains that the monitoring is to detect possible problems with a product, like if you have cases of phytotoxicity that may occur with contaminated fungicides or insecticides. Zimbabwe, thank you. General monitoring process, very good. Yes, so that my impression is that the feedback from the overwhelming majority of countries is actually there is little or no in place. Yes, that's South Africa. So you have a monitoring for levels of pesticides in ground surface water. That's a very good thing, but of course, that does not fully replace a monitoring of pesticides that are on the market. Okay, yes, yes. Well, interesting. That seems to be no requirement. It's also, of course, a matter of priorities and how agriculture is structured. Let's say when you have a lot of smallholder farmers, then it's more difficult than when you have large areas. I know that the monitoring is really tedious and it takes a lot of effort. I had to do that back at my time when I worked with Ministry of Agriculture in Switzerland. And we did that. We had the monitoring scheme together with the provinces, where the provinces knew the companies and took the samples. And we had them analyzed in our laboratory.
So there are still comments in the chat coming in, Marcus. I don't know if you want to switch over and have a look there.
Yes, so I see that Chilequa says there is a monitoring scheme in place but needs strengthening. I can imagine that. So that it is not easy to, as I said before, especially when it comes to the analysis of formulated pesticides, to look at active ingredients is comparatively straightforward, but when it comes to impurities, it will be fairly difficult. So that would, of course, also be something for a training course, if that would be helpful. An idea for FAO regional office to have to develop such a common strategy. So of course, I cannot ask a new question, but of course, it would be interesting also to know whether this would be something you would find useful. So I know that, I think, as I said before, in Kenya, we have at least the KEFIS that does some quality control.
So I'm not sure if you've seen the question that I posted. Let's see if I can find it. So asking how well are impurities picked up when conducting biomonitoring? So for example, in blood samples or in environmental monitoring. Does one have to have a standard for the different impurities that could be in the sample, or would they show up during the analysis?
They will show during the analysis. So blood analysis is less suited because some of these impurities, they are rapidly metabolized. Like when you have with malathion, you have a rapid degradation of malathion to the monoacid, and also you have a conversion of malathion to maloxone. So when it undergoes this metabolism, then it's easiest to do in the technical material. And Jane, you comment, impurities are kept as confidential business information. Yes. So the impurities that are non-relevant are confidential business information, but the relevant impurities cannot be confidential business information. But the other impurities that are not relevant, they are. That's true, because they provide information how the material is manufactured. I see that there are ad hoc programs in Zambia. The beauty of a monitoring program is, of course, that when you start, you get the kind of baseline. And then over time, when you do the same thing, maybe 1 or 2 years later, you see how things change. I agree with your comment, Andrea, that legislation needs to be sufficiently specific. When they are relevant, they cannot not be confidential business information. Yes, that's completely true. So I see we have more or less looked at all comments. We also there is no change in my overall impression that there is not much information, there is not much monitoring going on in the countries. And of course, it would be good to understand what is actually going on, where are the problems, like the recommendation in Article 4 of the code. So it would be important to understand what is going on in the field. And also in some countries, we are all aware there are illegal compounds out there. I've seen that in some countries there are, when you have banned highly hazardous compounds, like some of the carbamates, which still, of course, do work very well, there are illegal imports, that some of the carbamates are still imported and used. So we all understand, like carbofuran, it's a very convenient compound.
So I think that's a very good point to conclude on. And really, firstly, I'd like to say thank you very much, Marcus, for taking us through what is really a very technical issue, and yet has such an impact on both health and environmental toxicity and exposures. And regulators are already challenged with so much they have to look into, and somehow impurities either go under the radar, or the industry often blames impurities, that it's not their product that's doing the toxicity, but it's the impurities. So I think it's really key. And I think it was Christabel that made the comment, well, what can we do about it? And I think it's very important that we reflect on how impurities and specifications are put in our legislation. So again, thank you for taking us through that important discussion, and thank you to all the participants who have been posting their comments and also posting on the polls. I'd like to thank Tatum and Naomi in the background, who have made for the smooth running of this, yes, indeed, of this discussion. I'd like to remind members that our next discussion is on the 9th of June. We'll be looking at pesticide management initiatives. Also, if you would like to get the digest, so the summary of this discussion, make sure you've signed up for the pesticide discussion forum, and you will then receive it. We also have a newsletter, so the Pesticide Weekly, which comes out actually every 2 weeks, that has additional information. We'll make sure to put something in on impurities as well. So please make sure that you've signed up for that. And just if you want to do the postgraduate diploma in pesticide risk management at UCT, or the Masters in Chemicals Risk Management at UCT, the links have been put in the chat. We are accepting applications at the moment. So thank you again, Marcus, and thank you again to all participants. And Marcus, I hope you'll join us again in future with some of our discussions.
Sure.
And I wish you all a good day and stay safe.
Thank you so much, all of you. Thank you for the opportunity. I wish you all the best. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye for now.
Bye.